Yes, very good to see you. Yeah, so our second talk is Santiago Estupinan from Waterloo, speaking about a new shifted Littlewood-Richardson rule. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to give the talk. This is joint work with my supervisor, Oliver Pechenik. And I'm going to speak of a new combinatorial way to describe the cohomology of the orthogonal Grassmannian or the projective representations of the symmetric group. It's okay if that doesn't make sense. I am going to define both of these concepts, but just to have a general picture. So, I'm going to take a geometric approach to this topic. I begin with the complex Grassmannian. This is the set of k-dimensional subspaces of C to the n. And I let a partition be a finite list of positive integers. They are allowed to be equal. The cohomology of the Grassmannian is indexed by classes, indexed by partitions. They are called Schubert classes. And the reason for the name is that their multiplication codifies the intersection of these varieties. These varieties have their origin in questions of enumerative geometry. You're interested in how many subspaces intersect a given set of lines, and there are questions like this that are more general, and the Schubert varieties allow us to answer this type of questions. Similarly, the orthogonal Grassmannian is once again the set of all k-dimensional subspaces, only that this time I require these subspaces to be orthogonal to themselves. And instead of a partition, I have a strict partition. This is again a finite list of positive integers, but they must be different. So this list is strictly decreasing. And I can describe the cohomology of the orthogonal Grassmannian by classes indexed by strict partitions. Once again, the multiplication of these classes codifies the intersection of the corresponding Schubert varieties. And so to understand this multiplication, it's important to understand the multiplication in the basis. And the combinatorial description exists for both the Grassmannian and the orthogonal Grassmannian case. And the way to describe this is through a bridge with symmetric functions. And so you may be familiar with this, but just to remind you, the space of symmetric functions is generated by a basis called the basis of Schur symmetric functions. And this is a generating function over semi-standard Young tableaux, which are these diagrams that you can see. In the orthogonal Grassmannian case, I have P-Schur functions, and these are also generating functions, this time over shifted Young tableau. So these are very similar to semi-standard Young tableau, only the diagrams are shifted, and I am allowed to have primed entries. And basically, one is less than 2 prime, less than 2, less than 3 prime, less than 3, and so on. And so this is P sub lambda. Now, the reason that symmetric functions are useful in this context is because the coefficients describing the multiplication of classes in cohomology are exactly the coefficients that appear in the expansion of Schur symmetric functions and P-Schur symmetric functions correspondingly. So Schur symmetric functions for the Grassmannian and P-Schur symmetric functions for the orthogonal Grassmannian. But this doesn't give me a combinatorial way to describe the multiplication, so I still need a tool to compute this coefficient in practice. And for this, I need to study two insertion algorithms. The first one by Schoenstedt. So basically, I take a Young diagram, for example, this one. I want to insert a 1, and I consider the smallest entry bigger than 1. In this case, that is 2. I bump that entry. Then I insert that entry in the next row, following the same procedure. And there is a connection between this insertion algorithm and the increasing sequences. The way that you can compute the coefficients of the Grassmannian is that you can consider these skew diagrams, which are semi-standard Young tableau with certain gaps. And you can define the rectification of such a skew diagram. It's basically the insertion of the word of this tableau, of this skew tableau, as I read it from bottom to top, left to right. And then the coefficient C sub lambda mu nu is the number of skew tableau having shape nu skew mu that rectify to a fixed target of shape lambda. And so that's for the Grassmannian case. For the orthogonal Grassmannian case, there is a very similar insertion algorithm. This is known as Sagan and Worley's insertion. And the procedure is very similar, only that in this case, if I happen to bump an entry that is in a diagonal position, as in this case I bumped the 4, then that entry is bumped by columns. And all subsequent entries are bumped by columns. And once again, you can define the rectification of a skew shifted tableau by reading the word from bottom to top, left to right. And you can compute in practice the coefficients of the orthogonal Grassmannian using this rectification. And so you may ask if both the Grassmannian and the orthogonal Grassmannian are well understood, if there are combinatorial ways to compute these coefficients, why did we develop a new combinatorial model for the orthogonal Grassmannian case? And the reason is that these rules they all correspond to a rectification procedure, but there is a different perspective you can take both in the Grassmannian and the orthogonal Grassmannian. I begin with the Grassmannian. So instead of asking how many skew diagrams, how many skew tableaux rectify to a specific target, I can start with a family of tableaux with the property that if a certain word inserts to such a tableau, then a right factor of that word also inserts to a tableau inside the family. I call this the right factor property. And I take, if I take such a family, for example, Yamanouchi tableaux are an example of such a family. And the Yamanouchi tableaux are tableaux that in the first row consists only of ones, the second row consists entirely of twos, and so on. If you take a right factor of any word inserting to a tableau like this, then you obtain again a Yamanouchi tableau. So this is an example of such a family. And if I take a Yamanouchi tableau as my target, then a result of Lascoux and Schützenberger implies that I can obtain the coefficients by counting all tableaux such that when I concatenate a Yamanouchi word, having mu sub 1 ones, mu sub 2 twos, and so on, I obtain a Yamanouchi tableau containing nu sub 1 ones, nu sub 2 twos, and so on. And so this gives a dual perspective, and in particular for the Grassmannian, it is possible to obtain a combinatorial rule by taking Yamanouchi tableau as the targets. So in this case, both in the original rule and in the dual version, you can take Yamanouchi tableaus as targets, and that gives you a combinatorial model or a combinatorial description. Now, I want to think of the orthogonal Grassmannian, and in this case, a result of Serrano provides a framework to ask a very similar question. So once again, I can count the coefficients appearing in the cohomology by thinking of all tableaux obtained from mixed insertion. So this is not Sagan Worley insertion, but it's a different insertion that is available in the shifted setting. And I want to think of those tableaux that can be written as the mixed insertion of a certain word, such that when concatenated, they are equal to a fixed target. And once again, I need a family with the right factor property, but in contrast with the Grassmannian case, in this case, if I take the naive shifted Yamanouchi family, shifted tableaux that have only ones in the first row, only twos in the second row, and so on, they do not satisfy this property. And so there is something essentially different in this context, and it's worth exploring. So to obtain a different target, I first think of Yamanouchi words in a different way. So the way that they are usually defined is as the words such that if I read from right to left, the number of i's is greater than or equal than the number of I plus ones for all i's. But I can think of Yamanouchi words in a different way. So I can, Yamanouchi words are often associated to a partition, and then I can think of the Yamanouchi word associated to the partition lambda as the word such that the longest increasing sequence, or subsequence I should say, is one appearing lambda one times. The second longest weakly increasing subsequence is two appearing lambda two times, and so on. And so it's a family of words that has subsequences which are characterized by this condition. And so if I want a similar description this time for the shifted setting, then I want to replace increasing sequences by unimodal sequences. And this gives me a natural candidate for this context. And so I consider this family of words, it's a concatenation of decreasing sequences. Decreasing sequences are example of unimodal sequences. An unimodal sequence is a strictly decreasing sequence and then weakly increasing. And so I consider this concatenation of weakly decreasing sequences whose sizes are determined by the partition, in this case, the partition lambda. I call this a Berle-Yamanouchi sequence, or the Berle-Yamanouchi word associated to lambda, and it inserts to the right shape. And so for any strict partition nu, if I take the Berle-Yamanouchi word, which I denote by y hat sub nu, then it has shape nu. I also call any word that inserts to the same tableau as y hat sub nu a Berle-Yamanouchi word. And the question is if this family satisfies the right factor property. For that, the combinatorial characterization is very useful. So Berle-Yamanouchi words can be characterized because as I read from right to left, the number of i's is equal to the number of I plus ones, or the number of i's is exactly greater to the number of I plus ones by 1. In particular, note that all of these words are Yamanouchi, so that this is indeed a generalization. And this is an example of a Berle-Yamanouchi word. The second one is not Berle-Yamanouchi because in the red position, the number of threes is 2 times greater than the number of fours. And yes, again, all Berle-Yamanouchi words of the same content with the same number of entries insert to the same tableau. And so this family satisfies the right factor property. But if I want to count the coefficients of the orthogonal Grassmannian, I need to characterize the left factors appearing in this or satisfying this equation. And a difficulty in the shifted setting is that it's very difficult to find a reading word of a shifted tableau that mixed inserts to the same tableau. So instead, we try to describe combinatorially the tableau without reference to the reading word. And for that, I'll need several notions. So first of all, a horizontal strip is a skew shape containing at most one box in each column. And a generalized horizontal strip is basically a subset of cells of a horizontal strip. And the vertical strips are defined similarly, as well as generalized vertical strips. Once I have these notions in place, I define a generalized rim hook as a set of boxes that can be partitioned into a generalized vertical strip and a generalized horizontal strip. In this case, the vertical part is shown in red, the horizontal part is shown in blue. Then a Serrano-Pierre strip is a generalized rim hook that is filled with entries such that both the vertical part and the horizontal part are increasing. The vertical part is increasing from north to south. the horizontal part from west to east, and all the entries in the vertical part are required to be less than the entries in the horizontal part. And then, given partitions, strict partitions lambda, mu, and nu, I say that the tableau is constructible if I can partition the tableau into Serrano-Pierre strips, and whenever I have two Serrano-Pierre strips, so for example, in this case, I have the Serrano-Pierre strip consisting of the red entries and the blue entries, and I have a second Serrano-Pierre strip consisting of light red entries. Whenever I have two Serrano-Pierre strips like this, and I consider the unprimed entries, the unprimed entries of previous strips happen before unprimed entries of the next strips. And the same for the vertical entries or for the vertical part. So previous strips need to happen before in that column, before the strips that come after. And a tableau is constructible again if I can partition it into Serrano-Pierre strips. Then I say that a tableau is constructed if once I have this partition into Serrano-Pierre strips, there is no other way I can construct my Serrano-Pierre strips such that one of them is longer. So all of them are maximal in the sense that I cannot find a different partition with one of them being longer. In that case, a tableau is constructed, and then our main result is that the coefficients of the orthogonal Grassmannian can be described as the number of constructed tableaux determined by the respective partitions. And so this was an involved definition. You may think that this is difficult to apply, but the reason that this is a practical rule to implement is because you can construct a tableau. Essentially, you take your partitions, in this case, lambda, mu, and nu, and you determine these semi-open intervals. You start with the interval corresponding to the smallest letters, and then you find all different ways to lay down the entries of this interval into a vertical strip and a horizontal strip. And then you continue in this process, only that the entries of the subsequent Serrano-Pierre strips are allowed to appear between the entries of previous Serrano-Pierre strips. So in this case, you can see that these three in blue can happen between entries of a previous Serrano-Pierre strip. And you continue in this process with the next entries. And so you can kind of like recursively find all possible constructed tableau.
2 minutes.
Thank you. And so, yes, basically, if you consider this example, then you have lambda, mu, and nu. There are 4 possible tableaux that you can construct. One of them is constructible but not constructed, the tableau in D. But if you applied the rule that exists before for this context, discovered by Stembridge, you find that there are 8 possible tableaux. So this is to show that this is a more practical rule, and in our paper we show that this is computationally faster and for a family of coefficients. And I have maybe 1 minute for questions. So thank you so much.
Yeah, let's thank our speaker very quickly. And yes,